Hello guys and welcome back to the F1 Tube YouTube channel, and in today's video I will be reviewing the 2020 Styrian Grand Prix. Now today's race was definitely not as good as the Austrian Grand Prix last week, but that's okay. Last week's race was absolute anarchy, and there are going to be few races that will parallel the standard of drama that race produced. This race, the first 50 laps were okay. The last 15 laps, I thought were really decent, and I'd give this race a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. A transcendent, unbeatable Lewis Hamilton stormed towards the Styrian Grand Prix victory. He was untroubled. He took an utterly sensational pole position yesterday, and yeah, he was dominant, untroubled, and cruised towards his first victory of 2020. Championship leader Valtteri Bottas started 4th and ended up 2nd by the 71st lap. So a very good first 2 races of the season for Bottas. Then come the 2 Red Bulls of Max Verstappen in 3rd and Alex Albon in 4th. Lando Norris finishes 5th for McLaren ahead of Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll, Daniel Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz and Daniil Kvyat. Missing out on points, we have Kimi Raikkonen in 11th. Then we have Kevin Magnussen, Romain Grosjean, Antonio Giovinazzi, Pierre Gasly, George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. And retiring from this race, we have Esteban Ocon and the 2 Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel. Mercedes, what can you say? They were unbelievably quick and unbelievably smooth this weekend. They had no reliability concerns, no sensor issues. The cars were working in streamline and their pace was ominous, really. Lewis Hamilton, after an electrifying pole position yesterday, controlled the race from lap 1 all the way to lap 71 and took his first victory of 2020. A very good way to bounce back from a disappointing Austrian Grand Prix. And if this is the form Lewis Hamilton is going to carry over into the next few races, then the 7th World Championship for him will become more tangible race after race. He was unstoppable this weekend, was Lewis. Valtteri Bottas completed a Mercedes 1-2 and he made the moves when he needed to. He got past Carlos Sainz early on and then in the dying stages of the Grand Prix leapt up into 2nd place. And for Bottas, I know he was defeated by Hamilton this weekend, but after starting from 4th, he never really was going to challenge the 6-time world champion. So I believe he is 6 points ahead of his teammate in the Drivers' Championship, so the first 2 races for Bottas have been a success so far. For Red Bull, it was just a matter of them being second best to Mercedes this weekend. In qualifying, maybe they could have been a bit closer, but when Lewis Hamilton was on the form he was yesterday, it's incredulously difficult to defeat him. But in the race, in the drive, Red Bull just didn't have the pace of Mercedes, and Verstappen did the best he could, but he came home P3 in the end. Alex Albon, he didn't really have that good of pace throughout the entire weekend. He did struggle with understeer or oversteer on Friday, and he seemingly never rectified that in terms of pace in today's race. So 4th place, 12 decent points for him, but his pace does need improving as he pushes on for the Hungarian Grand Prix next week. Lando flipping Norris. He had such a slow start to the Grand Prix and wasn't exactly setting the race alight in the first 50 laps, but in those last 20 laps he was a man on a mission. He passed his McLaren teammate Carlos Sainz as the Spaniard seemingly let him through, but Norris then set some fastest laps and took the fight to Daniel Ricciardo and the 2 racing points, passing Ricciardo and Stroll in one go as the 2 were embroiled in a battle, and then at the very last corner on the last lap of the race he stole P5 from Sergio Perez, who did have front wing damage. What a start to 2020 for Lando Norris. He has been superb from practice 1 last Friday to the checkered flag today. He has been sensational. I just literally remembered Carlos Sainz started this race from 3rd place. His pace was not exactly brilliant in this Grand Prix. He was always going to be falling behind the likes of Bottas and Albon, but particularly in the last sector of the Grand Prix, he had no pace. He wasn't helped out by a slow pit stop, but his pace wasn't the greatest. But if there's any consolation, he did take the fastest lap. Racing Point had some blistering pace today. We always knew from pre-season testing that they could take the fight to the upper midfield teams and even sneak it in with the top 3 teams. And with Ferrari completely out of the picture, Racing Point are the 3rd quickest team on race pace at the moment, and that was evident with Sergio Perez's surge through the field after starting the race from like 17th, and he ended up 6th and was running as high as 5th, and his pace, brilliant. He got past the drivers when he needed to, and it looked like he would steal 4th from Alex Albon, but at turn 4 he came to blows with the tyre driver with just a few laps left, damaged his front wing and lost a place to Lando Norris at the final corner. But if you ask me, that incident is no different to the Hamilton-Albon incident last week, and I still can't decide whether that's a racing incident or a 5-second penalty, but if you're going to be penalising Hamilton for that incident, you've got to penalise Perez. Consistency is the word. I do not care if the outcome was worse for Perez than it was for Albon, because in that moment you are clearly not penalising or taking into consideration the actual incident. And from what I've seen, that incident is a carbon copy of Hamilton's crash with Albon this time last week. But even despite that incident, you've got a very good case for Perez being driver of the day, and perhaps, Perez driver of the day. Lance Stroll, he had some very decent pace. Of course, he had that Racing Point underneath him, but I think he's had a very solid start to the season. He was unlucky last week with that reliability problem, but this week he maybe could have taken 5th with all the carnage that ensued with Sergio Perez, because Racing Point did have the pace today and Stroll spent way too long behind Daniel Ricciardo. I was actually quite disappointed by Renault's pace today. They didn't really seem to have that much of it, particularly from Daniel Ricciardo in the middle stage of that Grand Prix. I think it was related to Esteban Ocon's retirement, who, by the way, the Frenchman, so unlucky. He did seem like he was going to be on for a strong points finish, but of course he was forced out of the race. And I think Renault may have just turned the engines down with Ricciardo just to make sure he could stay in the race, because he was quite slow in the middle part of that Grand Prix. To be fair to Daniil Kvyat, he had some strong race pace, so he did deserve a points finish for his efforts. Meanwhile, Pierre Gasly, he was put on a 2-stop strategy and it didn't work. Alfa Romeo. I think Raikkonen had solid race pace today, and to be fair, he did have solid race pace last week, but that wheel failure did put him out of the race, and I think forced him out of the points, because he was pretty quick last week, was Kimi, and I think he spent a little too much time behind his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi in today's race, which did cost him time, but I don't think that this car is on the pace of the AlphaTauri. Next up, Haas, and well, both drivers did finish this race, which couldn't be said for either of them last week, but they don't have the pace at all, do they? They don't look like they're going to be scoring points anytime soon. And for a team that normally goes well around the Red Bull ring, these 2 weeks have been pretty poor. Williams did not have the pace today. That is a fact, really, because they were way off the rest of the field. Not as bad as their 2019 races at the majority of Grand Prix, but they were quite a way off. It wasn't helped by the fact that George Russell did go off in the early stages of the Grand Prix whilst running in about P11, so maybe that cost him a place or two. But Williams, considering how well Saturday went, Sunday wasn't much of a success. But somehow Ferrari had an even worse race, because both cars didn't really get past the first lap. On that first lap, going into turn 3, we had cars all over the place, but inexplicably, Charles Leclerc went for a ridiculous move on the inside of Sebastian Vettel. The move was never going to work. The door that Leclerc thought was open was always going to shut, because the cars were just so close, and Vettel had to turn in some day of the week, and inevitably the two collided. Vettel had damage to his rear wing, Leclerc had damage to his flaw, and that was the race for both drivers. Leclerc accepted responsibility from what I have read, and it was Leclerc's fault. The stewards didn't penalise the Monegasque driver, but in a moral sense, and when you look at the incident, Seb is completely and utterly blameless. Charles, it was a stupid move. And before you say anything, no, this does not make Charles Leclerc a bad driver. Look at last week, for example. He drove the wheels off of that Ferrari car and somehow secured a podium finish. That car is dreadful, and Charles somehow got P2. And if you look at Monza last year, Belgium last year, Bahrain last year, some of the races he drove for Sauber, the kid has some serious speed, but he does need to refine his rough edges, and he does need to be a bit more mature in wheel-to-wheel combat. That is something he does need to develop. But of course, this is only his third season in F1, and he is one superstar for the future, so he is going to be making mistakes from time to time. By the way, guys, I will put a link down in the description below to the current championship standings, which will definitely be worth a look. I will also do my best to put out a video midweek about some of the talking points from this weekend's race. But guys, that is it for today's video. Please like this video, comment down below what you thought about today's Grand Prix, and please subscribe to the F1 Tube YouTube channel for more content regarding the world of F1. But until next time, guys, see you later.